Genesis 3 is not teaching us about zoology any more than Genesis 1 is teaching us about astronomy, where we have the sun created after we have days. I mean, how does that work? But let's just put that aside for now, and I want to ask this question, just for the average person watching this video, and even the evangelical scholar if they do. The first question is, do you believe that John was correct? The Apostle John, writing in the book of Revelation. Do you believe that John was correct or mistaken in Revelation 12:9? This is the verse where John, we might as well just click out to it so that you can see it. Revelation 12:9. This is where John mentions the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan. So the serpent, the devil, and Satan are connected, okay, in this verse. It's the only time in the Bible where these terms are actually connected in the same verse. And this is the last book of the New Testament. But the question remains, do you think John was correct or not? If you think John was correct in this identification that, hey, the serpent back there was really the devil, the one who becomes known as Satan. And by the way, look at the way John words this. That ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan. It doesn't mean, John's not saying, because John knows his Old Testament, this does not need to be read as though John is looking at Genesis 3 and seeing the word Satan in there. He's not. It's not there. But that rebel comes to be known as the devil, which is just, the slanderer, the liar, and Satan, the accuser. Okay, this individual rebel becomes known by these terms. That's all John is saying, and he's connecting the dots. So if you think John is correct, then you must conclude that the serpent in the garden was more than an animal. It's not just a snake. If you say he's mistaken, then you have a serious problem with biblical coherence and really biblical inspiration, at that point. And for evangelicals, again, I don't know how you're going to take that position. Second question I would ask, of viewers, and again, anybody else, if we were in a different forum, scholars who are saying, well, you can't really, this view isn't what most scholars think. I don't really care. Okay, I'm asking a serious question. I just asked one. Do you think John was correct or not? If you say he was correct, then the serpent in the garden is more than a snake. Question 2, do you believe that Genesis 3 was intended to provide us with lost zoological knowledge?
So the answer to that would be obviously no. Although people can screw that up too and be wrong about that and still understand what the Bible's saying. But I'll just say, when I watch dispensational sort of theologians talk about how we interpret the New Testament and the Old Testament, the historical, grammatical method, and just the enterprise of dispensationalism, you can't do what the New Testament does. You can't interpret the Old Testament with the New Testament. But they waver on this. Watch the scholars get together and present their papers to each other and talk about interpretation. They're confused. The classic Christian interpretation of the Bible is absolutely the New Testament interprets the Old Testament. Why? Because Jesus interprets the Old Testament in his ministry and his life, and it's recorded in the New Testament. And that should be our guide for understanding the Old Testament prophecies, not separating the Old Testament from the New Testament, ignoring the place where the New Testament writers are interpreting the Old Testament for us in light of its fulfillment during the first century and beyond. It's ridiculous. We have interpretation, a theological interpretation by God himself in the flesh, in the text. Give it a rest, dispensationalism. You're false.